Look, I'm just saying, if you want people to respect you, it makes sense for you to respect yourself.
Slut shaming.
She was dressed kind of like me, but had a simple Munich Drindel from Germany.
And you didn't stop at all to think that what you were doing might attract the witch?
Excuse me? Are you actually trying to blame the victim here?
I'm just saying that if there's a big fat witch around, maybe you shouldn't walk through the woods dressed as Hansel and Gretel. Whoa, not cool, Rick, not cool.
I will have your badge, sir.
Sorry, folks, sorry.
Okay. Go to class in your underwear if you want. Jeez.
Jeez!
It's common to find popular contemporary feminists who believe both of the following propositions. First, men contribute to rape culture when they give women's bodies undue sexual attention. But second, women are empowered when they're free to dress as provocatively as they want. In fact, many popular feminists would say that criticizing the way a woman dresses is itself a way of perpetuating rape culture. They call it slut-shaming, which is a form of victim blaming, which is something you should never, ever, ever do. Don't do it. I see you doing it. Stop it. Stop.
Hey! Stop it. Stop it. Okay. All right.
A pair of articles from Everyday Feminism, a popular intersectional feminist website, illustrate this point. In 5 ways rape culture exists unnoticed and goes unchecked in our everyday lives, we read that ads that objectify women to sell products perpetuate rape culture. Quote, the exposed necks of the models, the women of color in animal prints, the headless women's bodies, all of these images contribute to rape culture. The objectification of women reduces women to their bodies and makes their bodies available for visual consumption. It's easy to see why so many people objectify women's bodies when it's so normalized in our media. But when women transfer this objectification to real women in their lives, they're seen as objects available for their purposes, regardless of how the women feel. This can easily lead into ignoring the agency that's required for women to consent to sex. The sexualization of women sends a clear message. It is a man's role to gaze at women, and it is a woman's role to be a sexual object. And in the article 25 Everyday Examples of Rape Culture, we read that, quote, mothers who blame girls for posting sexy selfies and leading their sons into sin, instead of talking with their sons about their responsibility for their own sexual expression, are contributors to rape culture as well. The same sort of thinking goes into so-called slut walks, in which women dress in revealing clothing to protest slut-shaming. Again, a core idea here seems to be that women bear no responsibility for how they dress when it comes to rape culture. And just this past week, a Cornell student felt shamed by her female professor's suggestion that cutoff shorts might not be appropriate for a professional setting. Her response? Do her presentation in her underwear. Although the teacher made clear later on that her comment was about professionalism and not the so-called male gaze, an international student did go on to suggest that people have a responsibility in a professional setting to dress conservatively, at which point the student fled the room in tears. The student later commented, quote, I am not responsible for anyone's attention because we're capable of thinking for ourselves and we have agency. Well, that's one way to deal with patriarchy. Before proceeding, let me make a couple of points perfectly clear up front. First, women never deserve to be raped. I categorically deny that women should ever be blamed for rape, regardless of how they're dressed. Nor does dressing a certain way even constitute partial consent to any kind of sexual attention. Furthermore, a society that ignores the responsibilities of men when it comes to how women are treated and puts all or even most of the onus on women to protect men from vice is surely an unjust society. It doesn't follow, though, that women bear no responsibility for cultivating a culture of respect for women and their bodies. This brings us back to our 2 claims. Again, first, that men contribute to rape culture when they give undue sexual attention to women's bodies. And second, women are empowered when they're free to dress as provocatively as they want. I think there's a deep tension between these 2 claims. Why is it that men contribute to rape culture when they give women's bodies undue sexual attention, but women don't contribute to rape culture when they wear things that encourage undue sexual attention? Or to make the parallel even closer, why is it that men contribute to rape culture when they plaster their walls with women in bikinis, but women don't contribute to rape culture when they wear things like this? Does it contribute to rape culture when men consume pornography, but not when women freely choose to be in pornography? A popular way to try to reconcile these 2 claims is to argue that giving undue sexual attention to women's bodies who haven't consented to it is inherently objectifying, whereas freely choosing to present oneself in a provocative way is guaranteed not to be objectifying, precisely because the person consents to being presented in this kind of way. What contributes to rape culture is objectification, and the difference between these two cases explains why one contributes to rape culture and the other doesn't. But even if this line of argument's right, I don't think it rescues the consistency of these two claims. But before explaining why, I want to linger on this point about objectification for just a moment and explain why I think it's mistaken. The response starts out by claiming that it's impossible to freely objectify yourself. So the fact that you consent to being presented in a provocative way entails that you haven't objectified yourself. But I don't think that's right. It seems to me that you objectify yourself whenever you let yourself be treated like an object, whether you do so freely or not. This happens whenever someone knowingly and freely lets themselves be taken advantage of by other people. Suppose I have a freeloading roommate who never helps out around the house and often can't come up with his half of the rent simply because he's lazy. If I willingly refuse to confront him and make him pay his half of the rent, it seems to me that I'm allowing myself to be used as a tool for my roommate's benefit. I'm freely objectifying myself by letting my roommate take advantage of me. I might be doing it because I'm afraid to confront my roommate, or maybe I'm tempted to succumb to a low view of my own self-worth, but either way, it seems clear that I'm freely objectifying myself. Or suppose that I'm a rich but unpopular kid at school, and some popular kids find out that I have this really nice car. They pretend to like me so they can borrow it, but I see right through this charade. Nevertheless, I freely oblige, happy to get any kind of attention from the popular kids. I think this is another instance in which I would be freely objectifying myself. I'd be treating myself as a mere means to the ends of the popular kids. So it seems quite possible to freely objectify yourself. I suppose the next question is, are you freely objectifying yourself when you freely dress in a sexually provocative way? I think so, insofar as you're freely presenting yourself as a readily available object of sexual attention. If giving someone undue sexual attention is a form of objectification, surely presenting someone, including yourself, as a readily available object of sexual attention is also a form of objectification. But suppose I'm wrong about all of that, and women can't objectify themselves by dressing in a sexually provocative manner. The issue on the table is not, first and foremost, what counts as objectification. Rather, the fundamental question is what contributes to rape culture. That is, that set of attitudes that serves to trivialize and justify sexual violence towards women. Even if dressing in a sexually provocative way is not a way of objectifying yourself, it's still pretty plausible that dressing this way tends to produce in men this attitude that women's bodies are readily available for their sexual consumption. Far from empowering women, dressing this way seems to imply that there are little to no boundaries when it comes to access to women's bodies. Now, as a woman, you might think that's simply unfair. Women should be able to dress however they want, and the onus is on men not to take their dress as a signal that they're open for sexual attention. I think there's some truth to this reaction. Regardless of how a woman dresses, it is still on men to respect her. The way a woman dresses is never an excuse for a man to ogle her, let alone sexually assault her, nor does it constitute even partial consent to male sexual attention. But paying undue attention to this truth sometimes causes us to miss another important truth, namely that women do bear some responsibility for cultivating a culture of respect for women and their bodies. While it surely would be unfair to ask women to bear the whole brunt of cultivating this culture of respect, I don't think it's unfair to ask them to do their part. This brings us to one final way that a contemporary feminist can try to avoid this inconsistency between these two claims. They can argue that the reason why certain kinds of dress even count as sexually provocative in the first place is because men have over-sexualized women's bodies for centuries, and these attitudes have become ingrained in our culture over time. This is the ideology of the so-called Free the Nipple campaign, which argues that female breasts are no more inherently sexual than male breasts, in which case asymmetrical dress standards are inherently unjust. If this is right, the onus is on men to modify their attitudes towards female dress and the female body. Women should be free to wear whatever they want, even if our culture considers it sexually provocative, because the only reason we do consider it sexually provocative is due to patriarchy. Women simply shouldn't be forced to play a game the rules of which were set by men. I think there's definitely truth to this response. Nevertheless, I see two problems here. First and most fundamentally, even if it's true that all of our attitudes surrounding female dress are owing to patriarchy, it still doesn't follow that women aren't contributing to rape culture by dressing in ways that our culture considers sexually provocative. Presenting yourself in a way that our society considers sexually provocative will still have the effect of producing in men this attitude that women's bodies are freely available for consumption, regardless of the origin story of those attitudes. In other words, the explanation of why a certain kind of dress counts as sexually provocative is irrelevant to the effect of dressing that way. Put another way, men are going to be led to objectify women, regardless of whether they're finding a particular form of dress sexually provocative is owing to patriarchy. So insofar as the goal here is to reduce the attitudes that contribute to rape culture, this line of argument will do nothing to secure the conclusion that dressing this way won't have this effect. Still, it certainly would suck if men set all the rules of sexual provocativeness, and I grant that it would give women some claim to flout these rules, at least to some extent. So let's evaluate this patriarchal social constructionist claim with respect to sexual provocativeness on its own merits. It seems obvious enough that general cultural attitudes are often shaped by those who have the power and motivation to shape them, and for a long time, that's been men. And more generally, it's plausible that what we consider sexually provocative and which body parts we consider sexy is to some extent socially constructed. Sometimes it depends on the context, too. There are some cultures and certain sorts of people who think that open breastfeeding is immodest, whereas other cultures and other groups of people think it's completely commonplace and asexual. But it's very hard for me to believe that everything about social provocativeness is socially constructed, let alone socially constructed by men. Men and women are biological creatures, so at least part of the explanation for why they find certain displays sexual is going to have something to do with their nature as men and women and the way those interact. I won't go into details, but a quick Google search will turn up mountains of research on the biological basis of sexual attraction. If the reason why men find certain displays sexually provocative is owing to biology, and people generally aren't responsible for biological givens, though they are responsible for how they respond to them, I think it's a mistake to say that the onus is entirely on men to modify their attitudes towards female bodies and female dress. Women also bear some responsibility of taking stock of these biological givens and responding accordingly. Let me close by emphasizing something one more time. The way women dress is never an excuse for bad behavior, whether that's ogling or sexual assault. Nor does dressing in a particular way even constitute partial consent to unwanted male attention. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't contribute to a culture of objectification in which women are treated as less than full persons. Well, I don't think I have anything else controversial to say today. If you like this sort of content, consider subscribing to my channel. Just be sure to hit the little bell icon so you're notified when I post a new video. Until something else bothers me enough to make a YouTube video about it, see ya!